All right, so we're going to talk about statistics in Moodle and some of the things that you can look up and some of the conversations you can have with students for, using data to not only provide individual feedback, but also provide feedback relative to others and relative to the entire class, uh, or maybe all of your students. So in Moodle, there's something called statistics, and what you have to do to find statistics is you have to go into the individual um, quiz, and then once you're in there, you get to choose what you're looking at. So I'll do an example here quick. We'll go into a different course that I have that actually has some statistics in it. Maybe let's do, this is a physics course. Let's do I only did the multiple choice part of tests on here, much like they do in the AP test. I go into this. So if I want to look at statistics, here are the attempts. There's a couple ways to look at some statistics. So first you click on attempts. Here you're going to see, I've unenrolled all these kids, but this is what you'd see if you click on, you'd see individual students and you'd see their scores right here. Now, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, okay, so now here I have the average score for all 141 attempts, and you can see here that I have a histogram. Now I'm going to show you a different histogram. So this is of a concept check that they can continually take over and over. A better histogram is one from a test. This is a histogram from a test that we gave, and what it allows teachers to do is to discuss with their students things like these questions down here. So one of the things I'd first have them do is draw a best fit line. So we'll see here a best fit line. So something like your best fit line is going to look something like, oh, is going to look something like this on this example. So this example, if I were to ask some of these questions, how do you compare to your peers? So for instance, if I scored a 5, kids are going to start writing things like, I scored less than average. Your average is going to be somewhere over here around 7.5. So I scored less than average. You could say things like, most of the class scored in the AB range. So there's a huge chunk here. I scored in the not passing range. So you're going to have different types of things that students write. One of the other things that I like to do in terms of shape, what needs to happen to improve this curve? So we would talk about at the beginning of the class the fact that this is a pretty good looking curve. The only way to improve this curve is for the curve to now look like, so nobody fails. And now here, we're going to start to go up, and we would like it to peak right there. So essentially the perfect curve for an assessment would look something like this. That means most people are doing very well. Yes, there are people that aren't doing as well, but that's the curve of learning. I mean, if you were to say a perfect curve, you might want to go all the way over to an A or 100% and then go straight up. But this is a realistic perfect curve. Other times you're going to see curves that look like, so the most common shape of a curve you're going to see on one of these histograms is it's going to be low down here. I'm not going to do this to scale. It's going to go up, and about the B range it's going to peak, and then the A range it's going to come down like this. Well, if this is the shape, you can say things like, we would like to move the peak to the right. Kids can also say things like, we would like to bring this group of people to higher grades, so we'd like to tighten up our curve. In this example, we're already peaking to the right, so how are you going to improve it? You're going to move this to the right, so you're going to bring up lower scores. Then we ask the question, what can you do tomorrow to help this curve improve its shape? So things like, I'm going to help students who are struggling. That's going to help bring this up. I personally am going to, ensure that I'm engaged in the course. That would lead me to believe that somebody down here is writing that goal. Somebody up here might say things like, I'm going to help struggling learners. I'm going to ensure that my entire group is on the same page. So things like that. That's where we have a discussion about the curves and shapes and how students can help do things to improve those. Here's 5 questions that I commonly ask when we look at this histogram. Another thing I do with histograms is these are 2 different histograms, but I take the 2 histograms from the same test or the same assessment. Here's an example. Immediately after the test, the gray histogram, the one in the background, is the histogram. You can see it right here. So that's the histogram of the test. Through remediation, so I usually gave them a 2-week remediation period, but because of remediation, now it's the purple. So we've increased our average by 4%. You can see some students scored lower, but you can see most students improved scores. That's why we have this improved average. So we got a big gain here. We got a big gain at the top range. We got a big gain here. We've got a big gain here. Now we do have gains down here, but those came from reducing this and each of these going up. So there are students who are doing worse, but on the whole, we're making progress. So like I said before, students are going to give you the data to justify what you're doing. If you do remediation and the scores got worse or you saw no improvement, now you're in a situation where whatever I'm doing for remediation is not working. Really, it doesn't take much more time. I mean, the statistics are already in Moodle, so it doesn't take much more time to do the histograms. I superimposed them on each other and then made them 50% transparent. So you can see that over here. So you can see both of them. This also doesn't take much time. I used to do this the day after a test or a summative assessment, and it would help us write goals for the next unit. And it also helps them with data analysis. Let's look at a couple other statistics that you can dig into. Go back here. So this is the histogram like I showed. Some of the other statistics you can dig into are, so here I'm back on I just clicked on the concept check. I can click the cog over here, and in results, I can click on statistics. This is now going to give me statistics that I can confidently say 95% of people in the world don't ever look at these things. But because you're doing this in Moodle, it's already done for you, so it doesn't take any additional work. So first attempts, 38. I believe I had 41 or 43 students in the class, which means 5 people didn't try it. Well, it also means that each person who did try it, you can't say each person, but on average, if a person tried it, they did it 3.5 times. So our first attempts are 50%. Interestingly, when you have this stuff set up, pretty robust on Moodle, people will use this to replace homework. So I saw a lot of kids using this to learn. This is evidence of that. On the first attempt, they're getting 50. On their last attempt, they're getting 80. So rather than doing homework problems to learn some of this stuff, they're using the multiple attempts on concept checks to learn it. Let's see, average grade of highest graded attempts. There we go. Median for last, pretty good. Standard deviation, I don't use standard deviation here, but I do use it later on, and I'll point that out. I don't really know skewedness and kurtosis. That's above me. That's a deeper dive into educational research than I've gone. Same with this guy. The one I do want to point out, though, is the discrimination index. A discrimination index determines if a question is good at discriminating between a student who knows it and a student who doesn't. What that means is if somebody gets a perfect except 1, so they get a perfect -1, that question would get a bad discrimination index because the person did well, this question did not indicate that they did well. On the flip side, if a student gets all of them wrong except one of them right, now we're looking at the opposite. But that question, again, is not discriminating between people who know it and people who don't. That would get a poor discrimination index. If a student gets a perfect, each of those questions is discriminating well because they're getting all of them right. So then that would improve its discrimination index. If a student gets all of them wrong, the discrimination index also goes up for each question because each question is discriminating that they don't know it and it's doing it well. So we can look at the discrimination index. Now, another thing you can look at is the standard deviation. And some combination of discrimination index and standard deviation is how you get the discriminative efficiency. But so this is telling us the distribution of answers. If you have a high discrimination index, it's a good question, and you have a low standard deviation, that's an even better question because most people are answering it the same way, and it's determining if they understand it or they don't. On the flip side, if you have a low discrimination index, so it's not a good question, and you have a high standard deviation, that means answers are all over the board and it's not discriminating. That's not a good question. Now you have to be careful here. So I used random questions. Because I used random questions, I don't really want to use these because they're for all different types of questions. I want to use the individual question data. So here, these three were asked once. I'm not going to get much out of this. But later, this one doesn't have it, but there are, if you choose a question to be on a quiz and everybody gets that question, now your standard deviation, your discrimination index are valuable numbers to look at because you're getting a lot of information from a lot of attempts. In this example, it'd be 141 attempts. And next year when I reset my course, I didn't delete the data, so I would constantly be adding to this. If your discrimination index is below, I believe it's 10%, that means the question will highlight in red. I would do it on the individual question. If the question's highlighted red, I would go in and rewrite that question. There's something wrong with it. The nice thing is you can rewrite the question from the screen where you learn about the discrimination and the index and the standard deviation. So again, you don't have to go to that depth in understanding these things, but it's already done for you. It takes no additional work other than just pulling up the screen. But you don't have to calculate anything. You don't have to input data anywhere. It's already done for you. That's statistics.